Like to dedicate the shir morning in Masechet Berachot in the laws of or the Kavannah in the Tefillah, the requirement of Kavannah in Tefillah. First of all, let it be Leilun Nishmat Harav Hagon Adin Even Yisrael Steinzals Zichron Tzadik Livracha. Also for Harav Aaron Volkan Zichron Tzadik Livracha. For Avi Mori Va'ateret Roshi Tzvi Hirsch Ben Mordechai. For Hami Mori Va'ateret Roshi Eliezer Ben Yeshayahu David. Also for Chaim Shmuel Yaakov Ben Aryalev. Also for David Binyamin Ben Moshe Yaakov. And also for Shemaya Ben Adina. Ruach Adonai Tenechem Megan Eden. Also for Hatun Hana Bat Mazam Miyam. Also for Ruth Bat Rachel. For Meira Bat Haim. For Zina Bat Shura. For Chana Rachel Bat Binyamin Yehuda. And Rachel Bat Leah. Ruach Adonai Tenechem Megan Eden. Leavdil Ben Avitim Lahaim. Rufa Shema for Shevach Ben Hatun Hana. For Reuven ben Hatun Hana, for Eliyahu ben Sarah, for Moshe ben Bevai, for Yoshua ben Moshe, for Chaim Shnur Zalman Yehuda ben Hinda Yocheved, and for Dr. Zeb ben Leah. El Narafan Alehem, El Narafan Alehem, El Narafan Alehem. Also for Marsa bat Fortuna, Esther Farrell bat Chana Dvorah, for Chava Miriam bat Bunyareza, and for Haya Miriam bat Esther. El Narafan Alehen, El Narafan Alehen, El Narafan Alehen. And also for the Fashemal, for all the people affected by the coronavirus and anyone else who is sick, may they have a complete and speedy recovery. B'toch shah cholei amo Yisrael. El narafan alahem, El narafan alahem, El narafan alahem. And the zchut of Torah we're going to learn today. So open up, I'm sharing my screen. We're on the Gemara, we're in Masechet Berachot, we're on Daf Lamed Bet, Amud Bet. We're going to do a little review of what we did last week. We got a little bit into this page, and then we're going to Be'ezat Hashem do Rashi and Tosafot. So it says over here, Rabbi Elazar said, Gedolat Tefillah Yutamim Ma'asim Tovim. Greater is Tefillah than Ma'asim Tovim. She'en lecha gadol be'Ma'asim Tovim yoter Moshe Rabbeinu, because there's no one greater in Ma'asim Tovim than Moshe Rabbeinu. Af al pi chen lo na'ana ela b'tefillah. But nevertheless, he was only answered when he prayed. Shene'emar al tosef daber elai. Usmich le ale rosh hapiska. So we see Moshe Rabbeinu, despite the fact that he had Ma'asim Tovim, nevertheless he needed to be answered in his tefillah. If we look at Rashi, it says ale rosh hapiska. Bidvar tefillah zo nitratzeti leharotecha toah. Which means through these words of the tefillah, this is how I achieved Hashem's appeasement. I achieved appeasement, and to able to see the land. Which means through the tefillah that I did, I was able to appease Hashem enough to see the land, even though I wasn't allowed to cross over. So we look at the Tosafot. Tosafot say Gedolah tefillah yoter ma'asim tovim belo tefillah, which means ma'asim tovim without tefillah is that's what he's talking about here. Ma'asim tovim without tefillah. Sharei Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom afa pi shayu biyado ma'asim tovim. Moshe Rabbeinu, even though he had many ma'asim tovim, hutzrach letefillah, he was still required to have tefillah. So sometimes people think that just because they do good deeds and they do all kinds of wonderful things, that they don't have to ask for the things they need. No, we see over here Pum Fakir Moshe Rabbeinu, despite the fact that he had Ma'asim Tovim more than any other Jew ever, nevertheless he was still required to pray in order to get his Ratzon answered. So continue on in the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said, Gedolah ta'anit yoter min tzedakah. Greater is ta'anit more than tzedakah. My ta'ama, what's the reason? This is with his body and this is with his money. And we discussed last week, despite the fact that the mammon of a person is Chaviv alav and it's close to him, and basically mammon is called damim, and even though in the Kriyat Shema we have me'udecha is last in that pasuk, so therefore we see that is the most challenging of the first two. The first one is bechol avavecha, with the Yetzirah Tov and Yetzirah, bechol nafshecha, with your life, bechol me'udecha, that many people would rather die than give up their money. So that's not a stira to this, because death is one thing, but suffering, living a life of suffering, sometimes is even worse than death. So we see here that person would rather give up money than have physical suffering. Continue on in the Gemara. So it says over here, V'amar Rabbi Elazar, also Rabbi Elazar said, Gedolah tefillah yoter min hakorbanot. Greater is tefillah more than the korbanot, more than the sacrifices. Shene'emar, Lama li rov zivchechem. What do I need all of your sacrifices? This is of course in Parashat Chazon, in Haftarah Chazon. Uchtiv ufarischem kapechem. We see immediately after when you open up your hands to pray. So we see from there that God says, what do I need your sacrifices, but then it says that when you open up your hands to pray. So we see tefillah is still has a level, even if the sacrifices don't have a level. Look at Rashi. Ufarishem kapechem ilav gedolat tefillah. Without that, the tefillah is greater, which means even in absence of the korbanot, the tefillah is greater. Because the parasha said, why do I need your sacrifices? Lama li tu beparischem. I don't need it more than the prayer, which means people had a tendency in the time of the first Beit HaMikdash to think that all they got to do is bring a sacrifice and they were done. That's it. No, the purpose of the sacrifice is to get the person to recognize what was done wrong, so he can do tefillah, do vidui, and get kapara. Many of the sins that a person would do, they bring korban hatat. It was not sufficient just to bring the korban. The person also had to do the simichat yadayim. He had to put the hands on the animal, and the purpose of that is to stimulate the person to recognize that he's supposed to be instead of the animal, and therefore he should be raise up his prayer. So we see the concept of korbanot is with tefillah. In absence of korbanot, you only have tefillah, but nevertheless, people shouldn't think that because it's korbanot, I don't have to pray. Same idea like we said before regarding ma'asim tovim. Continuing on, lama li tuzu befarischem ha afilu zivhahem lo nichale. That your sacrifices, I don't need those sacrifices. I don't want them. I want the prayer. That's really the goal. So even though the Beit HaMikdash has been destroyed and we don't have the ability to have the korbanot, nevertheless we still have the tefillah, which is more powerful than the korbanot. Continuing on in the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said, Kol kohen sharag et hanefesh lo yisad kapav. Any kohen that caused there to be the death of a person, he's not allowed to do nesiat kapayim. He's not allowed to do birkat kohanim. Shene'emar yedechem damim maleu. That your hands are full of blood, or have blood inside. So we see if we look in this is the halacha, by the way. This is brought in the Shulchan Aruch that a kohen, even if he resulted in a person's death b'shogeg, which means not purposely but inadvertently, the Shulchan Aruch says he's not allowed to be noseh kapav. He's not allowed to do birkat kohanim anymore, because the purpose of the birkat kohanim is to bring shalom between the Jewish people and Hashem, and unfortunately through this person he caused there to be a death. So therefore that his hands can no longer do birkat kohanim. Continuing on, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar said, B'yom shechara Beit HaMikdash nina'alu sha'arei tefillah. From the time the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, the gates of prayer are locked. Shene'emar, Gam ki ez'ak va'ashaveya satam tefilati. This is a pasuk from Megillat Echa. Also, when I cried out and I supplicated, satam tefilati, the tefillah is closed. So we learn from here that since the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, of course Megillat Echa is talking after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, there was a closure of the gates of prayer. So therefore, how does this work? We just said before that in absence of the korbanot, you have the tefillah. Greater is tefillah than the korbanot. But what do we do when now we don't have korbanot? Does that mean that tefillah can't be answered? Chas v'shalom. Afapi, the Gemara continues. Rabbi Elazar continues. Afapi shisharet tefillah nin alu. Even though the gates of prayer are locked, are closed, share dima lo nin alu. But the gates of tears have not been locked. Shene'emar, as the pasuk says, Shim'at tefilati Hashem v'shavati ha'azina el dimati al teherash. Hear my prayer, Yud Vavke Hashem, v'shavati ha'azina, and pay close attention. The word ha'azina, which means to focus, active listening as opposed to passive listening. Shavati ha'azina, actively listen to my supplication. El dimati al teherash, and do not be silent to my tears. So we see from here that the tears is the way for the prayer to be answered. So let's look at in Rashi, al teherash, it says over here, midilo ketiv et dimati tireh. It doesn't say in the pasuk, look at my tears, as opposed to the other things where the person is asking Hashem to pay attention to the items that he's doing, which means Shima tefilati Hashem, I'm praying, please Hashem listen, Vishavati hazina, and be actively attentive to my supplication, El dimati al teherash. It doesn't say, it should say, if we're following through in the language, it should say, for my tears, please see my tears. That would be similar to everything else. But we see it says, to my tears, do not be silent. So we understand that the tears are the key to allowing the prayer to be heard. Continuing on in Rashi. Shema mina, we learn from here nir'et hi lefanav ve'en tzarich litpalel. Meaning, it's shma mina from here that if a person is having tears, he doesn't have to ask Hashem to see his tears. Hashem, of course, will see his tears. There's no reason to mention that. With the other two items, we want Hashem to listen to our supplication, which means Hashem has to do that in order for us to. But regarding the tears, the pasuk doesn't say to see my tears. It's inherently obvious that Hashem is going to see the tears, and this is where they're learning that the tears are the way to open up the gates of the prayer. Continuing on. Ela shetitkabel lefanav. So Rashi is saying over here what? That it should be that my prayer should be accepted before you. That Hashem, that you were praying that Hashem should accept the prayer before me. And this is a little difficult to understand. If you see there's a little bet in this Rashi, and this little bet in the Rashi, if you look over to the side over here in Hagot Habach, it says over here, Rashi, Dibura matchil al teherash, do not be silent, midelo, nota bene, which means basically additional note. Uve Bava Metzia daf nun tet. Look over in Bava Metzia what Rashi writes over there. So let's look over there in the Gemara in Bava Metzia, and this is the Rashi over here. Shimat tefilati en leshanoto milshon bakasha. Which Shimat Tefillati means you're asking Hashem to listen to your prayer, which means it's a request. It's a request of Hashem to listen to the prayer. Shemevakesh met HaKadosh Baruch Hu sheishmat tfilato. That he's asking Hashem to hear the prayer, which is in the past. I've just prayed, and you're asking Hashem to listen to the prayer. Aval al techerash. But al techerash, one might think you're asking Hashem not to be silent. No. Yesh l'sharato milshon bakasha. You change it from a lashon of bakasha, a different type of bakasha. What's the bakasha? Velomar bezo ani boteach. With this I am sure. She'en darkecha lishtok. That it is not your way to be silent in the face of tears. V'lo lahacharish. And do not be silent, which basically means what? This is a prayer for the atid. Al techerash, al taaseh, al titen mishamshin lashon bakasha, which means that it should be a bakasha, not that to listen to the prayer. I know you're going to listen to the tears, and this is basically a statement of saying that I know that Hashem is going to listen to the tears. Umashmin shel atid, it was lashon atid, meaning what? Kegon, al yiten lamot, which means don't give it, don't allow my tears not to be heard. Hare lashon bakasha v'yomer ka'al titenli me'uma. Same idea. So we see here these are bakashot for the future. So regarding the prayer, a person is asking Hashem after he finished praying to listen to what he prayed for, and the tears, Hashem should pay attention to those tears. Meaning what? That he should in the future remember those tears. This is what Rashi is saying over here, and it's clarified in the Rashi in Bava Metzia. Continuing on in the Gemara over here. Rabbah lo gezah ta'anita b'yoma da'eva. Rabbah would not ever declare a ta'anit in a day where it was cloudy. Mishum shene'emar, because it says, Sakota be'anan lach me'avor tefillah. There's also a pasuk from Echa that says over here, when there's ananim, that's a bad sign, which means a person, when there's a ananim, it's like there's a block between the tefillah going to the shamayim. So Rava would recognize in that situation that prayer is closed, and declaring a ta'anit on a cloudy day would not be helpful because there was no way to penetrate that. Continuing on, Amar Rav Elazar said, Miyom shechara bet hamikdash, from the day the bet hamikdash was destroyed, which is talking here about the first Bet HaMikdash, Nifseka Homat Barzel Ben Yisrael Avim Shebashamayim. A wall made out of iron was put between the Jewish people and their Father in heaven. Shene'emar, as it says, Ve'ata kach lecha mahavat barzel, ve'natata ota kir barzel benecha ben ha'ir. And you should put before you an iron girdle, and you should put it as a wall, as a partition between you and between the city. So from here we understand what? That there's a wall of barzel that is between the Jewish people and God while the city is destroyed, which is the ear that's discussed about here, ha'ir. And we understand, we learned before in Masechet Brachot, I think it was on Daf Hey, it says that Vayasev Hizkiyahu el Hakir, that he turned to the kir. And perhaps this is a remez to this concept of Kira Bazel. Nevertheless, Chizkiyahu was before the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, so we already see perhaps there were challenges, or maybe Chizkiyahu was giving us future reference to how a person should pray to make sure that a person, when he turns to this wall of Barzel, and through there is the hint of how a person can melt the wall of Barzel. How does a person melt Barzel? You melt it with heat. So therefore, when a person is praying, a person has to have lev, has to be hot, has to be passionate. As we learned in Rashi in last week's parasha, where it was parasha Ki Tetzeh, it says at the end, Asher karecha baderech, that the Amalek, Asher karecha baderech, and Rashi over there brings three explanations. What is karecha baderech? The first explanation he brings over there is from the language of Mikre, that people thought everything was coincidence, which is a level of apikorsut, which is a lack of proper emunah in Hashem, and that brings Amalek, Asher karecha bader, from the language of Mikre. Other language that the Rashi brings, a second option, is Keri, from the language of Keri, which is seminal emission, and there he specifically says Mishkav Zachur, homosexuality. That Amalek would basically, that was I guess one of the things that they did to rebel against God. And this is the concept of Amalek. They would take the Orla of the Jewish people and throw it to the Shamayim. The Maharal has a beautiful explanation of that. I'll leave that alone for now. The last one over there is germane to what we're talking about here. The last one over there is from the language of Kor, from the language of what is Keri, what is Asher karecha bader, from the language of Kar, Krirut. And there Rashi brings, there's a famous Rashi over there that says when the Jewish people came out of Egypt, they were very, very hot. They were very, very hot, which means they were passionate. They had just witnessed the decimation of Egypt. They had just seen Krat Yamsuf. They were so passionate and close to relationship to Hashem, ki holat ahava ani, that they were sick in love with Hashem because of all the things Hashem did for them. As it says, Zacharti la chesed neurayik, lechtech acharai bamidbar, which means when it was like we're new married, all excited. There's the passionate level of passion that's there. What happened? Amalek, what do they do? Rashi brings an example. You have a bathtub that's very, very hot. And anybody who jumps in is going to get scalded. The first person who jumps in gets scalded and burned. But what does he do? By him jumping in, he cools it off for everybody else to be able to go in. This is a remez to the Goyim, that Amalek was the first Goy that attacked us when we were, shall we say, what was supposed to be hot, and he cooled us off Kavyachol, and that allowed the other nations to attack us afterwards. And the understanding once again is, when did Amalek come? When the Jewish people said Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im ayin, which means despite all this passion they had, they were already fizzling, the passion was fizzling out. And what happened was, because they're already getting cold, this is what came Amalek. This is the concept of Asher karecha bader, Asher karecha, from the language of Kor. So how does a person cause there to be a rebuilding? There needs to be passion. There needs to be very, very significant amount of love and passion there, especially when he's praying. And perhaps we can say that the passion, the heat of that passion of the lev the person has, can melt the mechitza of Barzel, can melt this wall. And maybe that's what Chizkiyahu is referring to when he says Vayasev Chizkiyahu el Akir, because the prophet already come to him and told him that Chizkiyahu was going to die because he didn't have children. Chizkiyahu turned to the Kir and prayed very, very strong, very, very passionately, and that allowed his prayer to be answered. So we understand that tears also the same concept. When a person is crying, whether it's cries of happiness or cries of sadness, nevertheless there's a passion that's necessary there, and that passion is what will carry the prayers through, even if there's a mechitza of Barzel. Kavichol, it maybe would melt it. Okay, so let's look over here. Look at Rashi. V'natata ota kir barzel. What is kir barzel? Siman lemechitzat barzel. It's a siman of a wall of barzel, an iron wall. Hamafseket beno lebenam, that is separated between God and the Jewish people since the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. Okay, so now continuing on. So we just said a person should have passion in the prayer, but there's a risk. What's the risk? Now the Gemara is going to continue on and says over here. Amar Rav Hanin, Amar Rav Hanina. Rav Hanin said in the name of Rav Hanina, Kol ha'ma'arich b'tfilato and tfilato hozeret rekam. A person who's ma'arich, which means he prays more, he prays longer, with more kavanah, with more passion, he prays more, the tefillah doesn't come back empty-handed. That's what it says over here. Minalan, from where do we learn this? Mi Moshe Rabbeinu. From Moshe Rabbeinu we learn this from. Shne'emar va'atpalel el Hashem. It says over there, Moshe Rabbeinu prayed to Hashem. Uchtib batre. It's written immediately afterwards. Va'ishma Hashem elai gam ba'pam mahi. That Hashem also listened to me that time. So we understand that this concept of Moshe Rabbeinu, where of course Moshe Rabbeinu prayed Arba'im Yom va'Arba'im Laila, 40 days and 40 nights. That's called a tefillah, rucha, very, very long tefillah. Halavai, we should pray for an hour or 2 hours. Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for 40 days and 40 nights. We understand Hashem listens. So we see understanding that there's this concept of what? That a person is ma'arich in the tefillah. He spends more time in the prayer. It increases the likelihood that it doesn't come back empty-handed. Very, very careful lashon that's bred. It is not empty-handed, which means it's not or wasteful. There is still going to be a benefit. Now we're going to see from the next, the Gemara Talmud is going to say the benefit may not be you get the answer to your prayer, just have Moshe Rabbeinu receive the positive answer to his prayer. So see, ma'arich b'tefillah means a person who prays longer, more prayer. As David HaMelech said, v'ani tefillah, that I am prayer. And the Gemara learns that halavai, a person should be praying all day. As we have the Chasidim Rishonim, they would pray an hour before the prayer, an hour after the prayer. They would prepare themselves, and then an hour during prayer. That was 9 hours a day. That's how much time they would spend in prayer. That's practically all the days of the waking hours. If a person's sleeping 6 or 7 hours or 8 hours, if a person's praying for 9 hours a day, that doesn't leave much time for anything else. So continuing on, it says there's a concept of ma'arich in the tefillah, to lengthen the tefillah, certainly in Elul and certainly during the Aseri Me Teshuvah. So continuing on over here, now the Gemara is going to ask a question. Ini, or Eni, is this true? Is this correct? Veha amar Rav Chia bar Ava amar Rav Yochanan. Didn't Rav Chia say in the name, Rav Chia bar Ava say in the name of Rav Yochanan? Didn't he say, Kol ha'ma'arich b'tfilato me'ayen ba? Whoever is ma'arich in the tefillah and ma'ayen ba. Now we have to be careful. That's a different lashon. The first one said kol ha'ma'arich b'tfilato and tfilato chozeret rekam. Now this other limud over is saying kol ha'ma'arich b'tfilato u'me'ayen ba. What is u'me'ayen ba? Sof balideh kevlev. At the end, he's going to come to a heart pain or a heart attack, perhaps we could say. So we understand from here, this is an additional ma'ayen ba, which is a negative. So the ma'arich b'tfilah is not a problem as long as not ma'ayen ba. We'll see what that means shortly. Shne'emar, the pasuk says, tohelet memushacha mahalat lev. Hope deferred sickens the heart, meaning what? A person who is anticipating something coming forth and it doesn't happen, he becomes sick in the heart. Mai takante. What is this takana? So if a person is hoping for something that's going to happen, and let's say it doesn't happen, what is the takana? So now he's already done that. He's hoped for something to happen, and now it didn't happen. So he was already ma'ayen ba, and now he has ke'ev lev. What should a person do? Yasok b'Torah. He should involve himself in learning Torah. Not involve himself, yasok, delve, to go detailed, like we discussed in the first Gemara that we said, and also from the Zohar, if we remember. It says over here, Shne'emar, Etz hayim ta'ava ba'a. It says, Etz hayim ta'ava ba'a. So we understand from here, if you finish the pasuk in Mishlei, this is of course in Mishlei, chapter 13, verse number 12, it says, Tohelet mimushachat mahala lev, ve'etz hayim ta'ava ba'a. So what is a tree of life? When the ta'ava, when the person realizes his desire. When a person realizes desire. So we can say perhaps here that through the study of the Torah, maybe that will help the person to get his desires realized. Then Etz Chaim Ela Torah, and we know that whenever it says Etz Chaim, that's a remiss to the Torah. Shne'emar, Etz Chaim Il Mahazikim Ba. It's a tree of life for those who mahazik, for those who grab hold of the Torah. And this is very, very important from a halacha that when a person gets aliyah to Sefer Torah, it's very important to be mahazik, to hold the Sefer Torah when the person is making the berachot asher b'chaban mikol ha'amim, to be mahazik the Torah, and not to be mahazik the case. With the Sephardic Torah, generally you have the klaf and you have the case, and people get aliyah. What do? They hold on to the case. No, that is not the Torah. The case is not the Torah. The Torah is the klaf. So what a person should do is take his talet, because a person should not be holding a Sefer Torah arum. That's another place learned in Masechet Brachot, that a person should not hold the Sefer Torah naked. And that's why if it's shaharit, it's easy. A person has talet on, so he puts the talet. But that's why many Sefer Torah, what they do is they have a little like a cloth that's attached to the top. So when a person gets aliyah, he can use the cloth to hold on to the Sefer Torah with his hands. So we understand from here, this is what it means, mahazik, to grab hold of it. This is the concept of when a person gets aliyat to Sefer Torah. During the bracha, you mahazik, should hold on to it from the pasuk here, etz chaim lemahazikim ba.
So what do you do by mincha?
So mincha, where there's a Sefer Torah, you mean like on Shabbat?
Yeah.
A Sefer Torah should have a cloth that's attached to it, so the people can grab the cloth and hold the Sefer Torah with it. Okay? Of course, if the shul doesn't have one, you can always donate one. Or when a person gets aliyah, chacham enah berosho, he has something in his hands. Maybe he has a handkerchief or something that he's able to hold the Sefer Torah. Continuing on. La kasha. So that was a kasha. How is this possible? We see what's the kasha. There's no question here. What you said before, ma'arich betfilah is a good thing, and now you seem to suggest ma'arich betfilah u'me'ayen ba is a bad thing. How do we understand the contradiction? Had ma'arich me'ayen ba. This one, where it's bad, is when the person is ma'arich u'me'ayen. He's ma'arich and he's me'ayen. We'll see what that means shortly. Ha de ma'arich v'la me'ayen ba. And the first example is a case where a person is ma'arich, he has a long tefillah, but he's not me'ayen ba. He's not involved in it. He's not involved. He's involved in it, but he's not anticipating what he's praying for to come true because of his prayer. Okay, let's continue. Amar Rav Chama b'Rabbi Chanina. Im ro'eh adam shitpaleh v'lo na'ana. What? And now the Gemara is going to give another etzah. What if a person is ma'arich b'tfilah and he sees that he's not answered? Okay, he's not me'ayen ba, but he sees over the course of time he's not answered. What should you do? Should a person, God forbid, lose hope? Yahazor v'yitpalel. Return and pray again. Which means just because a person wasn't answered the first time doesn't mean he shouldn't be answered the second time. Perhaps we can say Moshe Rabbeinu arba'im yom v'arba'im laila. It doesn't mean he prayed 40 days the entire time straight. Maybe he was praying every single day multiple times. The concept of lahazorba, to return and go over and over and over and over again. Shene'emar kavel Hashem hazak v'yametz libecha v'kavel Hashem. The concept of kavel Hashem, hope with Hashem, which means a person should ask for what is needed. Hazak v'yametz libecha. The concept of hazak v'yametz. Strengthen your heart. What do you mean? Strengthen your heart and be courageous. V'kavel Hashem. So what do? You pray again, which means a person should not lose hope because his prayer has not been answered. He should still pray again and again and again, even if it's for the same thing multiple times, because perhaps he will be answered. Okay? And we see from there where it says there's a ma'ala to the tefillah independent of what one is asking for. So, because what does it say? The tefillah lo chozeret rekam. It doesn't come back empty, which means even though it may be that what he's asking for he's not receiving, certainly this prayer will improve his relationship with God, bring him closer to Hashem. Karov Adonai lechol kore'av. Closest Hashem to all those who call out to him. So certainly anyone who's calling out to Hashem, he's karov, he's close to Hashem, and this closeness to Hashem is exactly the goal of the selichot and the tefillah of Elul and of Aseh Yimei Teshuvah. The goal is to get close to Hashem, and I discussed this on Shabbat. This is from a sefer which we really should try to learn, and then maybe we pick another night and learn this sefer. It's called Talmud Eseh Sefirot, the Talmud of the Eseh Sefirot, written by Rav Ashlag. Rav Ashlag was the author of the Perush of the Zohar called the Sulam. And Rav Ashlag in there says some beautiful things. I can't read it and say it all, but I'll just summarize what he says over there. And he basically says that a person, when he's praying, the goal of prayer, a person should do things l'shem shamayim. All the ma'asim of a person should be l'shem shamayim. What does this mean, l'shem shamayim? What does this mean? Okay, what does it mean if a person doing something l'shem shamayim? Let's look at the opposite. What does it mean when it's not l'shem shamayim? A person doing a mitzvah for his own benefit. What does that mean? Olam hazeh. There are many people who come to shul on the holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippurim, and why do they pray? They pray very, very chazak. They pray very, very strong. Baruch Hashem. They come. We don't want to discourage anybody from coming. But why are they coming? Because they want to have a good parnasa that year. They want to have good business. Like we see that many synagogues, they sell petichat ha'echal for the parnasa, and they get a lot of money. The aliyah to the Sefer Torah say the Aliyah Shishi on Shabbat or the Shishi on Yom Kippurim. This is not so whatever. But the Parnasah, this I'm going to pay for that Aliyah. Baruch Hashem, he's giving tzedakah, tatzim imavet. But what is he really? His goal is the Parnasah. As long as he wants to make a good living, he wants to make good income. Or maybe people are coming to Bet Knesset because maybe they have sickness and they want to be healed, or maybe they don't have children, they want to have children, they want their children to be matzliach. All of these things, yes. And Baruch Hashem, some of the person has to have Parnasah. We know Rosh Hashanah, on Rosh Hashanah it's decided B'nei Hayeh and Mezoneh, children, grandchildren, Hayeh, Hayim, the person's life, how the person's going to live that year, whether he's going to have holy or not holy, whether he's going to get sick or not sick, and then Mezoneh, Parnasah. So we understand there's an inyan to pray on Rosh Hashanah for the Parnasah, yes, but that is self, that's about me. That is not l'shem shamayim. Even if he wants to say to himself, okay, I'm going to get parnasa so I can give tzedakah. It's really for yourself. It's not for l'shem shamayim. So that's a lower level. There's some people come Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur to pray, not because they're so concerned about the parnasa, but they want a chayim in olam haba. Zochreinu lechayim, melech hafetz b'chayim. They want to have chayim in olam haba. Maybe they're not so concerned about this world. They understand that this world is a world of sheker. They understand that. But they want to make sure they're written into the book of life. They want to have the book of life. They want to be written and inscribed in the book of life. So they come to the Tefillah, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippurim. They may pray a little bit for the Parnasah, but their focus is really to get Chelek Olam Haba. That's what they want. Now, obviously the second guy is a higher level than the first guy, because the first guy is caring about the physical, the second guy is caring more about the spiritual. But both of them have a problem. Both of them, it's about themselves. It's for me. The goal, what does it mean, l'shem shamayim? The more percentage that a person is praying for themselves, the less Shem Shamayim it is. The ultimate L'Shem Shamayim is the person is not praying him for himself. He's only praying for either someone else or praying for the Shekhinah. Praying for the Shekhinah to return back to her place. Praying for the Kucha Brichu Shechintei to come together and for the Bet HaMikdash to be built and Mashiach to come back. And not because we will be in a better position of the Jewish people, not so that we can rule over the Goyim, so that the image of God should be returned back to how it was before, for the Kavod of Hashem, that there should be a Kiddush Hashem in the world, instead of the Chilul Hashem that's going on when the Jewish people are down. Should be a Kiddush Hashem. This is what the person is praying for. This is L'Shem Shamayim. So it says over here, but nevertheless, we have this concept, and we have this concept mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma, that a person, this is Rav Ashlag says, a person has a concept of mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. A person can arrive. How does a person arrive l'shem shamayim? Yasok ba Torah. He should involve himself in the Torah. And sometimes people learn Torah so that people call them rabbis, so people stand up for them, so that they can show themselves that they're knowledgeable. Okay, this is not l'shem shamayim. This is l'shem atzmo. This is for himself. Baruch Hashem. He's learning Torah. And from what's going to happen is the Torah inside of it has a quality. And the quality of the Torah is if a person is studying the Torah, it's likely, or not maybe, it's possible that the person can arrive l'shem shamayim through the study of the Torah. So even if he starts off studying the Torah because he wants to have people call him rabbi, sooner or later the Torah is going to impact him and it's going to soften up his heart, and he's going to realize that there's something much bigger than himself, and that's going to allow him to be able to get l'shem shamayim, not just in his learning but in everything he does. So the Rav Ashlag says unbelievable. He says there's a din that says a Levi, there's 5 years is given to the Levi. So at 25 years old, the Levi starts being taught. If he learns an instrument, he's going to learn an instrument. If he's a singer, he's going to learn to be singing. But what happens? They give him 5 years. After 5 years, if his person's not going to be successful, then he won't be successful anymore. And we look in Pirkei Avot, when it talks about Limud HaTorah, what does it say? Ben Hamesh Lemikra. At 5 years old, a person should learn Mikra. A 5-year-old child should be learning Mikra, should be learning Pisukim. Not just Pisukim in the Torah, Pisukim in the whole Tanakh, between the ages of 5 and 10. Because it takes 5 years for the child between the ages of 5 and 10 to master Mikra, to master the Pisukim, the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah. Halavai, we should all master the Torah Shebichtav nowadays when we're 55 years old. Anyway, continue on. So between 5 and 10, Mikra. Then the Mishnah says, in Pirkei Avot, it says, Ben Eser le Mishnah. And that's when the child at 10 years old begins learning Mishnah, not Gemara, not Talmud. He's only learning Mishnah for the purpose of memorizing the Mishnah. And he's given 5 years between the ages of 10 and 15 so he can learn Mishnah, just Mishnah. Obviously, this should be explained a little bit, but the goal is for him to learn Mishnah. And those 5 years, and then after those 5 years, Ben Hamesh Esrei, it says, LeTalmud. And then when he's 15 years old, that's the first time that he should be taught Gemara. He should be taught Gemara. We see the educational system is not like this today. In fact, in one place, the Maharal Miprag writes that the reason Chas Shalom, the Torah, would be forgotten from the Jewish people is because they're not following the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot. And the only reason the Torah is still with the Jewish people is because Hashem is helping it to happen. If it wasn't for that, it was just for us, forget about it. Chas v'shalom, the Torah would have been forgotten before because we're not following the Mishnah, it says over there. That's what the Maharal Miprag says. But we see each one of those levels is 5 years. So Talmud is also 5 years. So what's mean 5 years? A person has to study Talmud his whole life. What does this mean? The concept of mitoch shelo lishma ba'al lishma. When a person's studying the Nigla, when a person, the Rav Ashlag says, when a person's studying the revealed Torah, he has to give, again, he should study the revealed Torah his whole life. He has to learn halakha, he has to learn how to live his life. There's no question about that. But the goal of mitoch shelo ba'al lishma, he gives Talmud, he gives Nigla 5 years. If in 5 years of studying Torah that's Nigla, that's revealed, which is the revealed Torah, which is the Talmud, and he doesn't come to the concept of lishma, 100% lishma, yasok b'Kabbalah. That's what he says. A person should involve himself in the Kabbalah at that point. And what's the reason? That doesn't mean he stops studying Nigla. Of course, he continues studying Nigla. But if in 5 years he doesn't get the quality out of the Nigla that allows him to go l'shem shamayim, then he has to study Sod. And he writes specifically that the Sod has a much greater ability to bring a person l'shem shamayim than the Nigla. It's harder to achieve it from the Nigla. And the reason for that is because the Nigla is couched, the revealed Torah is couched with all kinds of what he calls chitzoniyot. This one stole, this one didn't steal, this is kosher, this is not kosher. This is all chitzoniyot. To see the pnim, to see the inside, requires someone to dig deeper. It's possible to achieve that through the Torah Shenigle, but many times that's not achievable with Torah Shenigle, and that's when a person should study the Sod. When a person studies the Sod, since the Sod is only pnimiyut, it's only the internal, it's only the secret, this will allow the person to get to Lishma much, much faster than with Torah Shebichtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, that is not Sod. That's what Rav Ashlag said. Anyway, I'm not doing it justice. It's beautiful what he says inside, much more detail. Suffice it to say, this is what a person has to in order to get L'Shem Shamayim. And he writes the reason Mashiach is not here, it says Be'itach Hishena. The Mashiach has a deadline, but why is he not here earlier? He's not here earlier because people are praying too much for their own personal needs. They're not L'Shem Shamayim. If more or all the Jewish people were praying L'Shem Shamayim, then the Mashiach would come immediately. And that's the whole concept. We said, we have to get L'Shem Shamayim and not Nigiyot. And unfortunately, people spend a tremendous amount of time on the holidays only focus on what they need. Now, that's the motivation to come to shul. A person has to do what he's got to do. But really, the goal of the holidays is to connect to Hashem. That is the ultimate goal. And we have to recognize when it says, Zochrenu lechaim melech hafetz chaim, what does that mean, Zochrenu lechaim? What does this mean? So the Gemara Masechet Rosh Hashanah discusses the fact that there's books of the living and books of the dead that are open. And it says over there that Tzaddik is signed in the book of life. The Rasha is signed in the book of death. Okay? How do we understand this? First of all, how do we understand this? A person who dies that year, that means the Rasha? Chas v'shalom, when a big Tzaddik dies that year, that means in Rosh Hashanah he was determined he was Rasha? Chas v'shalom, that means everybody would live forever. How does this work? There comes a point in time when a person is going to die during their time. So some people, right, they die earlier. A person dies earlier, which means he's destined to die in this day because of his deeds. He dies earlier, as we see with the Ben Sorer or Moret. Take him when he's Zakai rather than when he becomes Hayav. But that's not such a great answer because we also understand that there's a custom amongst the Jewish people that they go to Kvarot. They go to the cemeteries, and part of that is to waken ourselves with the understanding that this is the end and to be much more serious in the prayer. But part of it is also because it also says Sifrei Metim. What does it mean, Sifrei Metim? It's not the books of the dead. It's not the people who are going to be alive, whether they're going to be alive or dead. Sifrei Chaim and Sifrei Metim, which means books of people who are alive and books of people who are dead, which means even the person that's in the grave, their books are open. Now, how do we understand this? After a year, a person spends in, let's say, Rasha, he spends a year in Gehenna, and then he goes to Gan Eden. He's already dead for 10 years. What's the concept of Sifrei Metim? Why are you opening up these books? So on the superficial level, the deeds of their children and grandchildren can raise them up. Lilu Nishmato. So every deed a person's doing in the Zecher of the person who passed away, or because he was taught by this grandfather, great-grandfather, that particular thing, that helps to cause an elevation to the Neshama of the person. He goes up and rises up. So therefore, every single time, every year, there's a reckoning of all those things, and the person can go up. But it's much deeper than that. It says that even the dead people are judged on Rosh Hashanah. What about a person's dead for 20 years? Why is he judged on Rosh Hashanah? What's happening here? He can go up, he's going to go down? How does this work? So we need to understand, what does it mean, Sifrei Chaim is Sifrei Metim. The Gemara tells us, Tzadikim, Afila b'mitatam nikraim hayim. Reshaim, Afila b'hayehem nikraim metim. That righteous people, even when they pass away from the world, they're called alive. Wicked people, even when they are alive, they're called dead people. Sifrei Metim and Sifrei Chaim is discussing what? How a person is connected to Hashem. What is the concept of Chaim? Chaim is connected to God. Meaning what? We have a pasuk. What does it say? V'atem hadvekim ba'Adonai Elohechem hayim kulechem hayom. Who's truly alive? The person who's truly alive is the person who's connected to God. This can be a person who is alive, and this could be a person who died. These people are connected to God. That's why it's called Srora Chaim, the bundle of life. We say this, a person after he passes away. Tieh nishmatot tzura b'tzrora chaim. Let his neshama be bundled with the bundle of life. But there are Rishaim in this world, and Metim, even Olam Hazeh, they're still alive, but they're considered to be dead. This is the concept of Sifrei Metim and Sifrei Chaim, which basically means what? Connected to Hashem. So what are we saying, Zochrenu L'chaim? What are we truly praying for? What is the ultimate goal of the holiday? The ultimate goal of the holiday is get close to Hashem. It says in the Tanakh, it says, Dirshu Hashem b'imatzeo, kira'uhu biyoto karov. Investigate, look for God when he can be found. Kirahu, call out to him when he's karov. And now we know Hashem has the ability to be karov to everybody, as it says, karov Adonai lechol korav lechol asher yikro be'emet, as we say in Ashrei, every single day. A person can be close to Hashem all year long. But that requires work on your part to do that. You have to take that first step and rise up. And if you do that, then Hashem will come to you. But on the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, Hashem takes the first step. He comes first. He comes close to you. You have the ability to get closer. Why? Because he's already taken that first step. This is what it means about Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. The Shu Hashem b'imatzeo. This is during Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the Gemara says. Meaning what? During this 10-day period, a person has an opportunity to get close to Hashem and to get true Chaim, to get more life, as opposed to distancing from God, which is considered to be death. And therefore, Zochrenu L'chaim, all this concept of Kotvenu B'Sefer HaChaim, meanings what? Make us close, help us to get close to you. We want to be close to you. This closeness to Hashem is the goal of the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. Yes, of course, a person has things he needs. He has to ask for them, parnasah, and things like that. But the ikar of the tefillah should be, I want to be close to Hashem. And now, how does that l'shem shamayim? A person might want to be close to Hashem because then he's achieved something. No, closest to Hashem. Why? Because this is what you commanded. This is why you created the world. As the Etz Chaim says in the beginning, the whole purpose of creating the world is to be metiv la'olam, for Hashem to do good to the world. This was the purpose for the creation of the world. Adam is there so Hashem would be good, close, should be good. And what is the ultimate good? What does this mean, give good to Adam? The most ultimate good is Hashem himself. Hashem is Tov. This is the concept. A person should want to have Hashem in his life every minute of every day. Why? Because this is what he's commanded to do. This is what Hashem wants. It's the Ratzon of Hashem. It should be the will of Hashem. It should be what Hashem wants. It should be pleasure for Hashem. This is what the goal of the Jew is, to live his life, that he's giving the pleasure to Hashem. As we see in the Torah, in this korbanot, reach nichoach la Hashem. What does this mean, reach nichoach? The korban is karov, the closeness. When a person gets close to Hashem, this is the reach nichoach. This gives nachat ruach, nachas, as we say, to Hashem. This is the goal of a Jew. And during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, beginning with Elul and then Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the goal of the Jew is to, not because of his own negiut, not because of his personal needs. I want to be close to you because you commanded me to do this, and I want to fulfill your will. That is the only reason I'm doing it. I have no interest in Olam Hazeh, I have no interest in Olam Haba. That doesn't mean the person's not going to get Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. He might get it, but that's not it. And that's the concept Me'ayem b'tfilah, what the Gemara is talking about here. Ma'arich b'tfilah is a very, very good thing. But sometimes what happens is a person's ma'arich in the tefillah, and then he's going to say to himself, what if I don't get it? Then Chas v'Shalom is tohel arishonim. That's what the Gemara says in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, that there's a danger. The Tosafot says over there's a danger that if a person is me'ayen ba, what happens? I prayed. I had an unbelievable prayer between Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. I asked Hashem to give me gesund parnasah this year. What happens? Over the course of the year, his parnasah is not so good. So what does he say? This ma'ayen ba, that he's looking to see that because he prayed, what he prayed for is going to happen. And what if it doesn't happen? Then there's a risk. What's the risk? We said over here, ke'ev lev, but there's even a bigger risk. What's the risk? The risk is the person's going to say, you know what? It wasn't helpful. I wish I wouldn't have. Oy va'avoy. Because the whole concept, what is the concept of teshuvah? We need to understand, what is the concept of teshuvah? It's tohe al harishonim. Meaning what? The person sinned. He made a mistake. He got distance from Hashem. He regrets it. That's the first step. Charata, to recognize he made a sin and to regret it. Meaning what? He regrets that he made the sin. Once he regrets he made the sin, this allows Hashem to remove the sin. This is the concept of mechilah slicha v'kapara. This is what gives it when he regrets the sin. And what's the ultimate showing that he regrets the sin? It's not enough as a mental exercise. It has to be by action. How does he truly show he regrets the sin? By not repeating it. This is the entire concept of teshuvah. But it works both ways. Just like it works for the bad. That if a person regrets the bad is removed. Similarly, if a person, chas v'shalom, regrets the good that he did, regrets a mitzvah that he did, that is then removed. He loses that. Which means the only way the person gets schar mitzvah, he has to do the mitzvah, and he's not regretting it afterwards. If he regrets it afterwards, he loses the schar of the mitzvah. In Olam Haba, of course, there's no schar mitzvot b'Olam Hazeh. So we understand this is the concept, it's a double thing. So therefore a person, the whole concept of teshuvah is to regret the bad deeds and to never, never regret the good deeds. And the risk of a person's me'ayen b'tfilah, he doesn't recognize that the goal of the tefillah is closeness to Hashem. That's it. He doesn't make a difference. The goal of the tefillah is closeness to Hashem. And that's the concept of ma'arichba, that he spends more time in tefillah. Why? Because he's cholah, he's sick. Just like a person who's sick in love with a girl. He wants to spend all day, he wants to talk to her all the time. Cholat ahava ani. And this is, of course, on the female side. We're the female, God is the male. That like a woman who's obsessed with her man. She just wants to talk to him all the time. Day, night, speak here, speak there. Doesn't want to I got to go to work. No, I want to talk to you. That's a very good sign. If the lady wants to talk to you all the time, that's a very, very good sign. Because that means she's loving you. If she doesn't want to talk to you, you have to worry. Maybe she's upset with you or there's other things going on. So we understand this is the concept of us. We have to always want to be talking to Hashem because cholat ahavani, we're sick in love with Hashem. This is to the level, and we only want because I want to be close to Hashem. There's no ulterior motive here. All I want to be is close to Hashem. And if there's benefit afterwards, Baruch Hashem, thank you so much. But I'm not expecting it. This is the concept of ma'arich betfilato and not me'ayen ba. And that's the danger of a person's me'ayen ba, that he's going to look forward to see what's happening. If it doesn't happen, the Tosafot says in the Masechet Rosh Hashanah, his chas v'shalom going to be tohel arishonim, and then he's going to regret the time that he spent prayer, and then he loses all that credit that he had, all that he lost, all that connection he lost because he regretted what he did. Let's look at the Tosafot over here. Perush explained shemetzapeh shetavo bakashato. Where the Tosafot is explaining what does it mean me'ayen ba, that he's anticipating metzapeh shetavo bakashato, that his desire is going to come lefi shekiven betfilato, because he had Kavannah, which means he's making it a condition. He's making a condition that because I had such tremendous Kavannah in the prayer, of course Hashem is going to give me what I want. No, not necessarily. And this is the concept with the Ashlag also brings us, the concept of almanat lekabel schar, that a person should do avodah lo almanat lekabel schar. This is the concept of l'shem shamayim. And ideally a person should do what they do so they don't receive reward. Even though we know there's a reward. Hashem said there's going to be a reward. We don't need anything more than that. We know it's going to happen. But anticipating the reward, that's the problem. Anticipating the coming of what you're praying for, that's the problem. Tema, now the Tosafot is going to ask a question. we've learned from here, it appears that the concept of iyun tefillah is not a good thing. It's a negative, which means ma'arich b'tefillah is a good thing. But ma'arich me'ayen is not a good thing. V'chen mashma perak horeh. And this is also similar, what we're going to learn in the Gemara, the next Gemara that we may learn, in Masechet Brachot. Shlosha dvarim mazkirin ma'avonoto shel adam. There are three things that allow Hashem to remember the sins of a person. The ka'amar iyun tefillah. One of them is iyun tefillah. When a person's me'ayen b'tfilato, like the Tosafot says over here, what happens? Hashem opens up the books to see, does he deserve it or not? Okay, which means nobody wants them to open up the books. So God's already opening up the books on Yom Adin. But nevertheless, open up the books the rest of the time is not such a good thing. But in Masechet Shabbat, it seems to be not saying like this, as the Tosafot are going to bring. The Ka'amar, as it says over there, Adam ocher perotem ba'olam hazeh. A person can eat the interest of the mitzvot. There's certain mitzvot that we know that a person receives the interest in olam hazeh. Keren kayem olam haba. V'hu chashiv iyun tefillah. And this is considered to be iyun tefillah, which means the things that are, there's ochel perotem, there are perot, while the keren a person doesn't receive in this world for the mitzvot, there's reward, there's interest on those mitzvot in this world, and this is considered to be iyun tefillah. Alma mal yutayim. We're going to say it's a good thing, because why shouldn't he look for the interest of the mitzvot that he did? V'chen mashma beget pashut, and also in Masechet Baba Batra, it also appears that it's also mashma over there in the parak of get pashut, the ka'amar mishlosha dvarim en adam nitzol b'chol yom. There are three things that a person cannot be saved from every single day. The ka'amar iyun tefillah perush en adam me'ayen ba, that a person is not me'ayen in the tefillah. Im ken mashma shu tov. It appears that it's a good thing. So over there it explained the opposite. It said these three things a person is not saved from every single day, and there it says iyun tefillah is one of them. So therefore, what does it mean? When a person is not me'ayen ba, that's a good thing. So we have to understand, what does this mean? Yesh lama the tre iyun tefillah yesh. So Tosafot says there's really two different types of iyun tefillah. Iyun tefillah d'hacha, iyun tefillah that we're talking about here in our Gemara here, hamtzapeh shetavo bakashato, that he's anticipating that what he asked for is going to come true. The iyun tefillah d'hatam, and the iyun tefillah that's discussed over there, Masechet Shabbat, shemechaven et libo l'tefillah, which means the concept of ma'arich u'me'ayen, meaning what? Not that he's looking for the totzaot, but he's ma'arich and me'ayen. He's going in detail in his prayer that he has now. This is fine, which means he's focusing on the words. It's like the concept of the Kavannah, the tefillah. Ma'arich u'mechaven, the concept of iyun here, that is a positive, it's iyun from the concept of Kavannah. But for the totzaot, the results, that's the problem the Gemara is bringing over here. And that gives a person ke'ev lev. This gives a person. But even if a person does that, then he becomes sick because he wants to know, what does it say? Ya'asok b'Torah. He should involve himself in the Torah, as the Zohar said from the beginning. El dimati al teherash. It says over here, to my tears you shall not be, you should not be silent to them. Meaning what? Perish Rashi. Rashi explained the dayek midyuka, that he specifically what? That person should recognize that he's asking Hashem, because Hashem's going to see the tears. The goal is that the tears should have influence for Hashem. Yes, midlo ka'amar v'dima tireh, because it doesn't say v'dimati tireh. It doesn't say that you should shma minashi nir et b'chol pam. From here we see what? Whenever a person is crying in the prayer, it's always seen. He doesn't even have to ask for it. It's a guarantee that whenever there are tears in the tefillah, it's going to be seen. He should only pray that the prayer should be accepted. And that's why we see, just to sum up, in Rosh Hashanah, not allowed to cry. A person is not allowed to make himself cry. If the tears happen on their own, then this is fine. But a person is not allowed to make himself cry. So let's say, how does a person, what happened? If a person is so close, feels so good, close to Hashem, that could cause tears. That is fine. He's not making himself cry, but through this prayer and his kavanah and his proper iyun in the tefillah and his marich in the tefillah, that causes tears to come. That's okay on Rosh Hashanah, as long as he's not doing it davka to make the tears happen. On Yom Kippur, however, a person should make himself cry. He should do what he can to make sure there are tears with his tefillah, because if there's no tears with the tefillah in Yom Kippurim, it means he's not taking it seriously enough. Because we see from here, you have the opportunity in Yom Kippur. It says, Agmara learned three things. It learned Ma'asim Tovim, it learned Tefillah, and it learned Tzom. On Kippur, you have all three. You have Ma'asim Tovim, that's the tzedakah. You have the Tzom, the fast, and you have the Tefillah. All three of these things are trifecta. But you want to have your tefillah listened to, therefore you have to have tears with it. And if a person has that, this is the iyun. And the goal of these days, these 40 days, is for a person to prepare themselves to already have that relationship with Hashem. He's already, Baruch Hashem, in Elul, become the tzaddik. So on Rosh Hashanah, he's already a tzaddik. He's already nechtam. He's already signed in the book as a tzaddik. And then all he has to worry about the next 10 days to get close to Hashem. And then, of course, help everybody else get close to Hashem with him. Being alone is no good. You have to get all the Jewish people close to Hashem. The goal is to spread this to other people so people get connected. And this Mashiach should come be around. Amen. Okay, Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen ve'amen. Have a good day, everybody.